Hey, welcome to the video. This is a Zeusing guide of sorts, which you can hopefully use to improve your Zeusing and mission making. This video will be broken into chapters. If part of the video seems boring to you, or you're not learning anything from it, feel free to skip to a chapter you feel will help you learn better. I'm going to be using Zeus Enhanced as well as Ace. I'll have both mods linked in the description. In our first chapter, we're going to cover basic objective design. Now, there are roughly 4 types of objectives: attack, defense, convoy, and counterinsurgency. These are very broad categories. Attack can include anything from assassinating an officer, to taking and holding a town, to hit and running a vehicle depot. Defense covers anything from holding a single strategic point, to an ambush objective, to defense in depth, and so on. Convoy objectives are any objective where you're transporting something from one location to another. And counterinsurgency covers being ambushed, locating IEDs, patrolling through a town, all that type of stuff. I won't be covering the counterinsurgency objectives, as it's the type I have the least experience with personally. So, to start, an attack objective. Taking a town, or a military base, or assassinating a HVT, or doing a hit and run all fall under the same category of your players being the ones to attack a location. Your players will choose different routes to approach these different objectives, but the mission building section will remain roughly the same for you. To give you an easy example, let's say you want your players to capture the town of Arudi. A rookie Zeus will generally do one of 2 things. He will either barely garrison the town itself, and just have infantry loosely around, that he'll send at the players when they get close, or, alternatively, he'll use the garrison tool on his AIs to spread them out over 30 different buildings, where you'll end up with 1 guy per building that the players need to clear. This is not good mission design for a very simple reason: it's not very fun to clear. No player wants to go through an entire town, building by building, killing, say, 1 AI at a time. It's a waste of their time and of yours. Having moving AI is marginally better, but falls into a different problem of no set hardpoints in the town for your players to clear. Your unit could, for instance, just hold the roads and kill the entire town's garrison as they wander onto the streets. So here's my recommendation for a town assault style objective. First, choose a few buildings to fortify. I'd personally recommend 2 fortified buildings for every squad, or 2 for every 5 players. This will depend on your player base, their wants, and their capabilities. For your chosen buildings, either manually place sandbags in them, or use the Zeus and Eden Interiors module linked in the description to fill these buildings up with fortifications. You can also have it be filled with objects to make the building feel more alive, though I highly recommend deleting almost all assets except 2 or 3 objects per room to help with FPS. Next, put down a squad in each building. If you're in Eden, open the unit's attributes and put this disable AI path in the units in it. If you're in Zeus, just go to the abilities and untick the path box, or alternatively, use the Ace Garrison tool. Doing this will stop the AI from moving around. You'll want to place the AIs from this squad around your fortified building. Don't have all the units visible from the exterior of the building. Have some that are out of sight inside so that the players have to go into CQC to fully clear it. Repeat this step for all of your fortified buildings. For a platoon level objective, you'll have 5 to 8 fortified buildings all throughout the town, with 5 to 8 guys per building. Next, place some fortified points outside of buildings in the town. You can, for instance, have an impromptu command point at the town square. You can have checkpoints at the entrances, bunkers and sandbags along the way. You can have roadblocks with soldiers around them. It's important to have the town be more than just some fortified buildings. Finally, you'll want some ambient AI on patrol. I'd recommend putting a couple of squads patrolling the exterior, and 1 or 2 fire teams patrolling the interior. As your group is clearing the town, you can also spawn in more fire teams at fortified buildings and send them towards the players. This makes the objective feel more alive, more lived in. It's not just static points that they're clearing, but a mix of hard points and mobile infantry that make the players feel immersed. One important thing to keep in mind, though, is to not spawn AI in areas the players have already cleared. If you do it, it gives the players the impression that their clearing isn't actually effective, that none of it matters, and can break morale. You can repeat this style for every type of attack objective pretty much. The main difference between doing it for a town to doing it for a military base is that the military base will be smaller, so you can have every building be a hardpoint. If you've built the objective in Eden, the Zeusing side is relatively simple. All you need to do is spawn the occasional fire team, ungarrison the occasional building if the players are close and you want to give them a different type of challenge, and send in reinforcements if it makes sense for the operation, and RC the occasional AI if you want. Now, let's move on to defense objectives. For a defense style objective where the players are holding a point, you have 2 broad types: static or defense in depth. Static is where the players have a single point to hold, say a military base, a town, a checkpoint, etc., and if they fall back out of it, they fail. This type of objective is not that fun for an entire operation, but when combined with an assault objective, so in other words, first they take an enemy town and then they hold it from an enemy counterattack, it can be very fun. Alternatively, you can use defense in depth, which can be used for an entire defensive operation. The idea is that the players are trying to delay the enemy rather than stop them at a certain point. You can set this up by giving the players several points to defend during the course of the mission, where they progressively have to fall back over the course of the entire operation. This is important for a defensive operation, as it allows a change in scenery. Players get bored holding the same location for an hour straight, and always engaging enemies coming from the same routes. However, if you have, say, 3 different locations they have to defend over the course of an hour, that's 20 minutes per location, so they just have enough time to get used to the enemies coming from a certain direction before they have to move again and adapt once more. Here's a few ways you can force your players to fall back. You can overwhelm them with superior firepower, so start sending more armored vehicles, say RC a tank, and fire explosive rounds close enough to scare the players, but far enough away that none of them take damage. And if they've been holding a point for a while, this may be enough for them to consider falling back. Secondly, you can have them fall back for story or plot reasons. If they're holding this road, say, and a friendly platoon was holding this road but has now been overrun, they need to pull back to their next point to hold both roads. Another way is with artillery. If you start having artillery land around the players, they'll get the message that they need to fall back. I generally avoid this myself though, and only use it as a last resort, as it feels incredibly unfair when you're playing an op and the Zeus just starts launching artillery around you. For the Zeus side, Zeusing an AI assault on a defensive location is relatively simple. To start with, have a vanguard force you send in first. To give the players maximum satisfaction, I generally let this force drive straight into your player's line and get ambushed. After, or while that force is being dealt with, spawn infantry units out of sight from the players in the direction the enemy is assaulting from, or have them be brought up in vehicles and send them at the players. You can also send the occasional vehicle or aircraft at the players too. It's important to keep a steady stream of enemies coming in. As a squad dies, you want to spawn a new one and have them be sent in to replace the dead. The most important thing is to keep pressure on the players while keeping the fighting balanced. This will vary from unit to unit. For my players with our medical settings, I generally send between 3 to 5 AI squads for one player squad, staggered out per wave with a couple of 50 cal vehicles or APCs, and the very rare IFV that I will generally RC myself to make sure it doesn't insta-wipe a squad. You have to see what will work for your players though. Maybe they'll want more AI squads, and maybe they'll want a lot less. A neat trick you can do for a defensive operation to spice things up is load a vehicle full of AI, RC the driver, and rush the players with it to buzz past their line. This will create panic for the players, as AI is now dismantling behind them, but it'll be very fun for them to deal with while remaining relatively ineffectual, as they'll generally murder the AI before they can mount a proper resistance. Finally, I'm going to touch on convoy objectives. The concept is relatively simple. The players have something they need to transport from point A to point B, and will face enemies along the way. You'll want to determine ambush spots along the way that you'll engage the players at. At these locations, you'll spawn AI that you'll have go prone and on hold fire, with maybe some statics hidden in the trees. Once the players are close, you'll give the order to stand up and open fire. You can also have roadblocks along the way, IEDs, optional objectives where the players have to investigate a nearby outpost that has gone silent, etc. This objective type is kind of broad. It can be hard to get right and very easy to go wrong. I just wouldn't recommend doing it too often compared to the first 2 we've talked about. Now, let's move on to the next chapter, making your world feel alive. You don't want the objective locations to be the only areas that have any life breathed into them, while the rest of the map feels dead. Now, this isn't to say you need things all over the map, but a little effort in the area the players will be operating in can go a long way. If the players are operating in hostile territory, you can have random enemy outposts, roadblocks, etc. scattered through their AO, random compounds that have been taken over that aren't part of their objective. You can have civilians in your mission, though be careful not to put too many, and have these civilians talking in front of buildings the players go by. You can create road accidents, have an ambulance treating the wounded. You can have civilian traffic drive by. You can have friendly positions around the map if the players are operating in their own territory or driving through it on their way to their objective. If they're fighting somewhere where there's been an ongoing battle, you can use the damaged building module and place artillery craters around. What's important is you want the world to feel lived in, so the players are as immersed as possible in your mission. If your players are driving through empty towns on their way to the objective with nothing around them, they won't be as immersed, and immersion is incredibly powerful. Let's move on to Chapter 3. Let your players experiment. You want to give players the freedom to approach objectives how they want to. Now, obviously, there is a limit to this. As a mission maker, you don't have infinite time when mission making, and if you've planned out an operation a certain way, and the operational leader decides he's going to take a 10-kilometer detour to hit an objective from a route you never planned for, just because he figures you, and not the enemy commander, won't have planned for this, it's okay to put your foot down and say, no, you can't drive 8 kilometers to Ethera from Kor and attack Oreo Castro from the east instead of south, going through 3 different villages because you know I haven't prepared that route. That being said, you have to let them experiment. As an example, if the players are trying to be sneaky, lower the AI spotting skill. Let them live out their stealth fantasy. Obviously, if they're not actually being sneaky at all and are visible as hell, don't be afraid to bump the spawning back to normal, but if they're making a genuine attempt at stealth, let it play out. This concept obviously has its limits. If the players are paradropping right on top of an objective, you don't need to pull your punches and allow them to land unscathed. But let your players experiment. They will appreciate it. Chapter 4, Custom AI and Deep Copy Paste. I highly recommend having a debug corner and using deep copy and deep paste. If you're using Zeus Enhanced, you can deep copy and deep paste using Ctrl-Shift-C and Ctrl-Shift-V. Normal copy-paste will copy a fresh unit with standard gear for his template, whereas deep copy-paste will copy and paste the unit with the exact gear you've given him. This opens up your ability to not just use pre-built factions, but make your own custom factions and units using uniforms, guns, and equipment you want your AI to have. If you want to make a special forces unit, you can. If you want to make a custom militia force, you can. All you need is a debug corner, some AI squads that have the equipment you want them using, and to use deep copy and deep paste from that debug corner when you want to use your AI. I generally recommend disabling the simulation on the units in your debug corner so that you can save as many frames as possible. Chapter 5, Remote Controlling. Remote controlling units is a very touchy subject. In my Zeusing videos, I often get comments complaining on how I do it, with people saying my aim sucks, or that the units IRC would be more accurate in real life, etc. You get the idea. Now, my IRCing style is adapted to my player base, but I recommend it overall. It's the pretending to be an AI style. When I IRC a unit, I act like an AI. I toggle walk on, I walk with my gun up, slowly, occasionally pausing and rotating. When I shoot at players, I don't shoot them straight away. I do single shots around them slowly, and on the 3rd or 4th shot, I'll shoot them in the limbs or chest once. Now, there are exceptions, and if for instance I'm using very shitty weaponry that'll barely harm the players anyway, I'll go for some chest shots straight away. But generally, my style is slow and to choose suppression over all else. Now, why do I do this? Players generally don't like fighting a remote-controlled unit. They don't like knowing they're engaging in PvP with the Zeus. The way IRC, most of the time, players are not aware they're dueling the Zeus. They're just putting down another AI, and so it rarely brings their mood down. At the end of the day, it's simply not very fun for a player to get downed by the Zeus when he's RCing a unit. You as the Zeus get infinite tries to take someone out from their POV, and if they go down, that's potentially the next 5 minutes on the floor waiting to be woke up, or in the worst case scenario, dying and needing to be reinserted. If the AI takes them out, it's different, it's fair, but if it's you as the Zeus, not so much. Again, that's just my view on it and why I RC the way I do. Others will disagree, and that is fine. I know some units ban RCing altogether, for instance. I will say, this has worked for my group. Chapter 6, How to Save FPS. Dynamic Simulation, Disabling Simulation, and Simple Objects. You'll want to turn all objects that can be turned into simple objects. You'll want to disable simulation on all objects the players can't interact with, and you'll want to turn on dynamic simulation for objects the players need to interact with, such as place down buildings and for AI. This saves the most amount of frames possible in a mission, so I really do recommend it a lot. Turning on dynamic simulation for your AI alone can be a game changer in fully prepared missions. That being said, I would not recommend fully prepared missions. Instead, as a Zeus, have the first objective ready to go, and the fortifications and buildings ready at all the other objectives, but not the AI. Then once your first objective is about 75% cleared, garrison the next one, and so on. FPS is the biggest challenge to Arma 3, and no matter how your op is, if your players are playing with 20 FPS, they won't be having nearly as much fun as a slightly worse op with 30 FPS. So anything that helps FPS is a huge positive, and I highly recommend investing in learning how dynamic simulation works, how disabling simulation works, and using simple objects. Another great way to save FPS is to delete dead units as your players advance. This is called cleanup. As soon as your players leave an objective, delete all the dead AI there. If your players have killed 50 AI at an objective and the frames are getting a bit low, it's okay to go through and delete half or more of the bodies. Just try and avoid doing it on bodies the players are observing. Does it mess with immersion a bit? Yes, but FPS is far more important than immersion. Chapter 7. Mix your mission objectives. You want to mix your mission objectives. Don't have the entire mission be take these 3 towns, for instance. Instead, mix your attack objectives with defense objectives, or have your players take a town and then an airfield or a military base. Players appreciate variety in a mission. Doing the same thing for 2 hours will get tiresome, so have your objectives be different. Chapter 8. Have enough AI to fight. The biggest complaint I personally have when playing an Arma op is when there isn't enough AI for me to fight. Some of the ops I've turned into videos on my channel, I unironically have included every enemy I killed during the op, and it'll only amount to like 8 guys over 2 hours. You need to have enough stuff for your players to shoot at. Now, the biggest balancing act is balancing enough AI with both the mission's balance and your player's FPS, as high enemy count with low FPS is very bad. A way to keep frames high while having enough AI at an objective is to spawn more AI in the uncleared sections of the objective as the players are clearing it. If they've cleared the north of Kavala, for instance, and taking out a platoon-sized element there, you can spawn 2 squads in the middle or south and send them north to attack the players. Shooting your gun is fun, and killing AI is fun, so make sure you have enough enemies to go around. Chapter 9. Balancing bigger assets. This chapter doesn't apply to infantry-only units, but if you're planning on including air or armor in your ops, you'll want to listen. First, we need to cover air assets. Only very rarely include jets and attack helicopters, such as the Comanche, in your operations. Attack helicopters especially are extremely hard to balance for, and you've only got 2 real options when including them. You either need to talk to your pilots beforehand and lay down some clear ground rules of what they can and can't engage, or you have to just accept that the operation will be a cakewalk for your players. For aircraft otherwise, I highly recommend giving pilots armed Little Birds, Blackhawks, Wildcats, whatever. These are aircraft that are armed, but that the pilot can't just sit 10 kilometers away from the battlefield with and left click on everything to kill it instantly. To balance against these aircraft, don't have too much AA. You can have a ZU or 2 down at a main objective, but if you have random man pads placed around the map, your pilot is going to smash his monitor.
Man, I'm gonna break my monitor, I swear!
Instead, have 50 cals scattered around objectives. Those have plenty of stopping power and can shoot down a lot of helicopters if they're flying too close to an objective. That being said, if the pilot is still being too risky and in an area you don't want him to be in, you can still use a man pad to take him down. For ground assets, it's a bit complicated. APCs like the RHS Striker and BTR are pretty balanced. You don't really need to do anything special to balance around them. Tanks are honestly also pretty balanced as long as you have enough infantry to go with them. You just need to make sure you're spawning in enough hostile vehicle assets to give the tank something to shoot at. IFVs, meanwhile, such as the Warrior or RHS Bradley, can be very hard to balance around. These will take your infantry's jobs in a lot of cases. They will murder AI infantry before your player infantry can see them. This creates a very boring operation for the majority of the players, as they'll just be watching the IFVs do the job that they want to be doing instead. Now, if you're insistent on including these, I recommend disabling the vehicle's thermals and spawning in a lot of enemy infantry, much more than you usually would, as these vehicles will deal with your regular amount of enemies with ease. Chapter 10. Roleplay. Now, be careful with your RP segments in your operation. What exactly do I mean by this? I'm specifically talking here about slowing the operation down to a crawl so that you and your unit's officers can have a little talk session where you pretend to be their officer or a prisoner they're interrogating or whatever. If the rest of your unit has to just sit on their asses and wait for this roleplay session to be done, you're doing it wrong, as it's boring for 70% of your players. Now, if it's a small operation and everyone's involved, then no foul, pop off king, you're fine. If it's a bigger operation though, you can still have these roleplay segments, but you need something else for your rank and file to do while you RP with the officers. If your players are holding an objective, for instance, when this is happening, you can have an AI assault come in and attack while the RP is going on. That way, the rank and file have something to shoot at while you continue your RP with the operation lead and tell him the info you needed him to learn. This may seem minor, but if every operation you've got 5 to 10 minutes where you're just talking to the operation leader and the rest of your players are sitting around and waiting, this will save them a lot of time and as such a lot of resentment, as no one likes sitting around just waiting for 2 people to be done with their conversation. This is the final chapter we're going to cover. It's about accepting criticism and learning from your mistakes. All Zeuses kind of suck at the beginning. Zeusing is hard to get right. If you're playing with veteran players, they may have very high standards that are very hard for you to meet as a first-time Zeus. The most important thing you can do is check in with your players after an operation and ask them what they liked and what they disliked. Now, this is important. Do not get defensive and combative over what they didn't like. If you react badly, they might stop telling you, at which point you'll no longer be able to learn and grow. It's important to hear them out, mark down what they say, and learn from it. If they didn't like how an objective went, figure out how you could do it better next time. If they say the FPS sucked, work on reducing the amount of assets down in your mission. This isn't to say all criticism is correct or your fault. Sometimes it's even on the operation leader. If, for instance, he has two squads, Alpha and Bravo, and he consistently uses Alpha to attack stuff and Bravo just to hold the rear and be the base of fire team, Bravo could have a significantly worse op than Alpha. That being said though, you still need to take their complaints into account. And in that scenario, for instance, talk to the operation leader and tell him he needs to switch up which teams he's using for what. The most important thing, though, to remember is to take criticism and try and improve from it. If you disagree with the person, just try and understand why they felt that way and what they think you could have done better. I hope this guide has helped you become a better Zeus. All you've got left to do now is practice and maybe go watch some Zeusing footage to see if that can help you. If the video did help you in any way, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. That's it. See ya.